covering some really important and exciting topics for you to kind of gain insight about before you, move on to your next steps. So the title of this panel in itself is a bit contrary to what the conference in itself is providing, which is information about management consulting. So why would we talk about exit options? And I thought to myself, even prior to joining or taking an interest in management consulting, was that I'm from the sciences. My specialization is in neural regeneration and stroke recovery. How could I possibly be doing well in the corporate world or have those business acumens that will really help me drive in that setting? So, and I thought that that would be the end-all, be-all. So once I joined consulting, that's it. This is the corporate world, and I wouldn't be able to kind of come out of it. But while I have explored this option, I have come across many people who have gone beyond consulting, and it truly speaks to the kind of speakers we had today. For example, Douglas, 15 years of consulting, and now he's currently working for LinkedIn, and also unconventional, like Cisco, who, was not in consulting at all, but had joined consulting later. So, it's just to give you or paint that big picture for you to kind of understand that consulting is not the end-all, be-all. It kind of gives you that stepping stone to gain some of these skill sets that you can later really apply in the fields which you feel passionate about or find out that you feel passionate about. So we have a panel of excellent speakers here today who we will be talking, kind of discussing this topic with. And first is Mouneesh Sinha. Mouneesh Sinha is currently a director of strategy. He had completed his bachelor's in technology and master's in technology in electrical engineering in the Indian Institute of Technology. Later, he achieved his MBA from Indian School of Business, and he has also worked for the Boston Consulting Group. Moving on to Matthew. Matthew Killi works at Deeplearni, a Toronto-based company who creates artificial intelligence for large enterprises. He had completed his bachelor's in sciences in physics and mathematics with great distinction. Then he went on to pursue his PhD at the University of St. Andrews in theoretical physics with distinction. And following that, it was PhD again in theoretical physics at the University of Toronto. And he has in the past worked for McKinsey. And Wendy Dobson-Belaire, she is currently a forecasting lead at GlaxoSmithKline, which is a pharmaceutical company. She had received her BSc in microbiology from Guelph University, and then she completed her PhD from U of T in microbiology and immunology. She also got her MBA from the University of Western Ontario, Richard Ivey School of Business, and in the past she has worked as a consultant for Quintel IMS. So as you can see, the speakers that we have here today have past experiences in consulting, and they have really kind of diverged from that path into pursuing something else. And just to kind of start this conversation up today, we had a few questions that we had already kind of told you about. So the first one would be, kind of give an overview of your current role and how you kind of transitioned from consulting into your current role today. So I'll start with Mouneesh first.
Sure. So in my current role, I am a director in the strategy team for Scotiabank. In Scotiabank, we have 3 different strategy teams. One is for Canadian banking, one is for enterprise strategy, and one for international banking. I am in the Canadian banking team, and we run high priority projects for the bank. It is, you can think of it similar to an internal consulting group, which does projects for the bank, which are super high priority, coming directly from the CEO and down. The model that we work on is pretty similar to that of consulting, actually. So we have projects which are time bound, 12 to 16 weeks in general, work with the client teams, which in this case is the bank itself, and we deliver on a predetermined set of objectives within a defined time frame. So the model is very similar to that of consulting. In terms of how I ended up in a strategy team in a bank, I think there were 4 stages to me selecting Scotiabank or going into a strategy team. I think the first stage was actually making up my mind that I need to leave. There are times in consulting when this happens. So I think the first step is to actually be very clear that you want to leave consulting and go out, or basically make it distinguish it from a bad phase in a project. So be very clear that I want to leave now. When that phase came, the next phase was deciding what I wanted to do, which industry, which sector, and essentially you need to decide what will you bring to the table when you go into the industry. So do you want to work in financial services? Do you want to work in consumer goods? Do you want to work in strategy? That is something that you need to decide in your head. I did that. Post that, I started reaching out to alums. So BCG alums in the specific companies where I found interest. Started getting responses, coffee chats, resulting in meetings and interviews, and sort of it happened in very quickly, and got a role with Scotiabank, took it, met the entire team just to be clear that what am I getting into, whether the team is good, whether the projects are good, and here I am.
Oh, excellent. So Matthew, Killi, just to give, first an overview of your current role again in deep learning and how you transitioned yourself, not necessarily going into your exit strategy yet, but your role within McKinsey and then following.
Yeah, so basically I joined Deep Learning beginning of this year in January. And my role there and sort of what we do and what I drive there is we lead a practice where we're more or less injecting AI capabilities into large enterprises. So what that means typically is thinking about artificial intelligence strategy, machine learning, all of those things, helping with them thinking about the roadmap, that transformation. Then at the same time, we typically identify a use case and we actually build bespoke machine learning algorithms or AIs for them. So it's a little bit of the traditional consulting, I'd say, but layered on top of that, a lot of technical stuff. So that gets back into my academic roots, which I absolutely love now. And then sort of the third layer of that is, working in a sort of startup environment and the mayhem that is. And that's just been a lot of fun and a lot of learning. So yeah, bridging all those things together, it's been nice. It's, it's about tapping into all those different skill sets that you have, really understanding what you're good at, and being able to leverage that. So, that's basically has been my approach.
All right, Wendy?
So I actually have very recently, just this past week, made a change in my role. I've just been with GSK since February of this year, but there's already a change. So I'm actually now part of a newly formed team at GSK called the Business Intelligence Team. What that basically is a team of individuals who do a lot of strategy analysis, performance analysis to help GSK kind of make strategic decisions about what they'd like to do with both the pharmaceuticals they currently have launched, but also prepare for the launch of upcoming products that they have in their pipeline. It's kind of almost a bit of a theme here. Like you can almost look at it almost like an internal consulting team. We do have particular projects that we kind of help support GSK from a strategic point of view, but we also provide them the basic kind of data analyses that they need to kind of see how they're doing on a day-to-day basis. My previous role, which is up there, forecasting lead, was a little more focused on forecasting, but basically now my role includes forecasting, and for those of you who don't know what that is, it's just trying to estimate the future pathway for GSK's products, both current and ones that are coming to be launched. But now it involves that piece plus all the other kind of strategic analyses that would be involved in kind of helping the business move forward.
Okay, excellent. So now that we have sort of a current kind of understanding of their current roles, I kind of want to take a step back, and Mouneesh had already kind of answered parts of it, but it's about your plan and the exit strategy, and so how did you plan your exit strategy into your post-consulting role or the company that you had led to? And I know you did sort of point out the things, but feel free to kind of expand on that. And also, you know, understanding that you had completed your undergraduate degrees in India from a very reputed school. So was there a difficulty in itself to have, when you had come to Canada to, you know, land a position with Boston Consulting Group, was, you know, any sorts of social disparities that was affected as well? So, you know, it's not just the technical, but also kind of the social differences, and how you as an individual were considered as the diverse part of that role, and your struggle or the plan or the strategy that you took to get to your current role. Also the strategy that you took to kind of also get into consulting, and that would be also applying to Matthew and Wendy. Well,
Okay, too many questions.
okay.
Let me try to answer
So
some of
clearly,
them
again,
one by one.
Yeah, strategy to get to Boston Consulting, following your travel, and again, then your exit strategy.
Yeah, so the first part is around how did I end up here. I think consulting is something that gives you that opportunity. So I didn't join BCG in Toronto. I joined in India. I moved around 4 countries. So I think that is an option, that is a privilege that you get if you are in a global company, consulting company specifically. I cannot think of too many companies which can provide that kind of opportunity where you just move along different countries and work in different environments, developing economies, developed economies, very seamlessly, because of the work that we do as consultants is agnostic to the industry that you're working in, is agnostic to the market that you are operating in. So it is very easy and it is encouraged. So that's how I explored multiple geographies. As I said, Canada was the 4th country that I moved to within a 6-year career in BCG. In terms of differences, yes, there are differences. There are differences in culture. There are differences in the way people operate, but they are not significant. I think in consulting it was very easy to adjust, because it's the analysis that you do, the approach that you have is consistent no matter what industry or which country you're working in. And that is the value that consultants bring, right? You analyze something from first principles. So no problems there. I wouldn't say there was any issue when I started thinking about the move, because I think the skill and learning that you have in consulting is appreciated in the industry. So when you move to the industry, they don't necessarily see where you did your undergrad from or where you grew up. It is not important. I think that's something about Canada as well. It is very welcoming to immigrants, and diverse culture is pretty much normal. Every other person is from a different nationality. So hence it was not an issue. People were evaluating me on the skill sets that I had, the value that I was bringing to the table, and not on where I had my education from. So very easy there. In terms of finding the role, I think that is something that I spend the most amount of time on, that which company I want to work for, which team I wanted to work for. And I think my logic, it could be different for different people. I think my biggest concern when leaving consulting was whether the learning and development would stop or would slow down, because let's be clear, consulting has a very high performance culture. So you learn as a result quite a bit. And how I made sure that I was comfortable was meeting the entire team. So before I had moved into the strategy team, I had met the SVP, I had met the VPs, I had met all the directors, and I had met all the team, even the junior most member in the team. And that was my way of evaluating that, okay, the SVP will always say good things about the team and the projects that you do. But when you speak to the lowest ranked guy, whether he says the same thing or not, that was important for me. And that is how I evaluated that whether this is the right fit for me or not.
Okay. So Matthew, if you want to kind of talk about your exit strategy from McKinsey into deep learning, and how did you come about this opportunity?
Yeah, so my exit strategy, well, I guess it was 3 phases. The first phase was to have a baby. And this was great because it allowed me to have extra time. McKinsey, actually, the day my daughter was born, I got an email saying they get 8 weeks of paternity leave, which is pretty unprecedented. So the level of support was fantastic. So that let me have some time to really, self-reflect and go through things, start to explore different things. And actually the thing I did was I picked a few topics because of the technical background. I was dying to dig into something meaty. Learned about blockchain. Started learning a little bit more about AI and machine learning. So that was sort of the first bit of it. The second thing I did was I really got involved. So I sort of an opportunity landed on my lap was I got to work with a whole bunch of people actually across Ontario, looking at how to build out the Toronto-Waterloo Innovation Corridor. And the focus there was a lot on health tech, a lot on fintech, and AI as well, and quantum computing. So that was, that kept me sane when you're looking. It's nice to do that, and and what that actually did, it was kind of neat in retrospect. You have a tool now because you have this white paper where you can start to, when you're talking with folks, you have a leave behind and it adds value to them. So I thought that actually added a whole bunch of, it opened a lot of doors, quite simply. So if you have an opportunity to do that, by all means, I think that's great. And then third thing, and this actually applies very much to getting into consulting, figuring out my path after PhD, is just talking to as many folks as you can. And cast a really wide net, because it's amazing the insights you'll get from folks. You'll have, probably one of the most inspiring conversations I had was with a guy who's disrupting the furniture space. And it was amazing to see a lot of how inspiring he was, a lot of the lessons out of that, and you actually derive a lot of value. So instead of taking the approach of, hey, I got to find a job, it was more of a mindset of how do I best redeploy myself? What are my assets? And let's try and find some clues on where I can add value. So that's kind of the approach, and the more formalities of how it happened was ran into an old office mate, actually a PhD from U of T as well, and he had joined. He was a former CEO of Scotiabank's capital markets, and they were more or less a machine learning secret tank there. Anyway, so I started conversations with them, and same thing, it's really about the people, talking to them, because it doesn't matter really what the business is or, other things that can change. It's really about, can you work with these folks day in and day out? Do you believe in them? Can you go to war with them? So that was sort of my top priority. I'll close with that.
Okay, Wendy?
I think for my exit strategy, it's kind of intimately linked to my entry strategy into consulting. So I'm going to touch a little bit on both. I think for those of you who heard earlier, you heard from one of my past colleagues, Sebastian, on who Quintiles IMS is. But they're very well known amongst the pharmaceutical industry. They provide a lot of the data that the pharmaceutical industry uses to gauge the performance of their products on the market. So when I was looking for where I wanted, what my career path would be when I finished graduate school, I had kind of narrowed in maybe a little bit differently in that I was kind of focused in a particular industry and even a particular function. I really had a passion for therapeutic area commercialization, and specifically around pharma, and figuring out how to bring products to market, and how products were being brought to market presently. So that's kind of what kind of led me to kind of focus in on the consulting group at Quintiles IMS, because that really, as opposed to maybe some of my other panelists, Quintiles IMS's consulting group is very specialized. And that was the work that I wanted to be doing. And I was even very open, even with the hiring managers at Quintiles IMS, that likely at some point in time, I might want to move to the client side. That was my interest in that company. And actually, it was still very much supported, because the reality is a lot of consultants do at some point move to some of their clients, the industries that they've been working in, and hopefully bring a bit of business back at some point too. So my exit strategy was kind of very intimately linked to that. I spent a lot of time, I learned a lot of different functions while it was from the pharmaceutical perspective while I was in Quintiles IMS. And at one point in time, I felt, my growth and my development had kind of met my goals for entering Quintiles IMS. So then I started to think about how I would move on to that client side and what companies. I had the benefit of working with pretty much every pharmaceutical company that has a presence in Canada. So which companies did I like the most, culture-wise, did I identify with? And I think it's the same type of thing. You need to do that research. You need to figure out what it is you've enjoyed about your time in consulting and where your interests lie. And in my case, even what specific company I felt I aligned with. And then I moved into my role just this past February. And I have to say, it's a lot of the same. The role is quite similar to what I was doing, just a slightly different perspective. But I leveraged my contacts both from the work I was doing with clients, but I'm currently reporting to an ex-IMS consultant as well. So it's the connections there too.
Okay, one last question that I can ask you, and then I'm going to open up it to the audience for any questions that you may have for our panel speakers. That is, how did consulting provide value in particular? Like, what were the skill sets that you had learned alongside your education, and how did that really does it change your way of thinking, or does it really position you or expose you to sorts of other opportunities kind of better than the other people who are not, have those privileges or have been a part of Boston Consulting Group and McKinsey and Quintiles IMS? And the second part is, when deciding for these consulting, for the roles that you took on after consulting, did you find that the cultural dynamics had changed, or it was tougher to fit into?
Okay, so in terms of the skill sets that you learn, I think are relevant for, in my opinion, relevant for any role that you do. I think the structured thinking, I think that's the most important part. I think you'll tend to learn a way of evaluating anything in a very structured manner, and that is an asset no matter which industry or which practice area you are working in. So that's number one. Number two, I think consulting gives you a lot of confidence because the people that you are dealing with on a day-to-day basis are very, very senior level people. So you bulletproof things, you read through things. So you become very, very solid in terms of your approach, and you get a lot of confidence. Learning curve, you get slapped quite a bit though, but over time you gain a lot of confidence. And I think these two things, in general, when you go into any role, help you. So it makes it easy for you to move. And as Matthew was saying, it doesn't matter which role you take up, because by your training you have been working on different projects, different industries. So you sort of become comfortable that, okay, I don't know anything about this, but I know how to figure it out. So I think that's the confidence that you get, and that structured thinking process helps you. In terms of the second part, was it easy to fit in? Was it the same? It's not the same. So there are differences. But some differences are good. Some differences I could do without. So the good parts are the work-life balance is substantially better. So there's no comparison. It is substantially better. So I get a lot of free time that I can spend with my family, which is great. Access to data is much easier because you work with the same team. So earlier every time I had done a case with a bank, every time I wanted new data, I had to do a new NDA because, the customer related data, I cannot give it to you. And it was a mess. Which is not there when I work in the bank now. So it's very easy to cut through crap and get to the point. And I think the biggest reason why the work-life balance is good is because you are an internal team, at least for me, I think we don't end up doing a lot of unnecessary stuff. And by that, what I mean is in consulting, there's always a focus on not only doing something that you have been hired for, but doing always a little bit more than that, so that there are opportunities for a follow-on project. You understand what can be done and you sell something more, and hence the amount of work you end up doing is higher. That is not the case, and that is great. On the flip side, it is slower. So in the beginning, you kind of feel that, okay, why is this taking so much time? In consulting, it's very, very fast. Sometimes I find a corporate like Scotiabank to be a little hierarchical. Consulting is very flat. So an idea from an associate or a partner is the same. It's just evaluated on merit. Sometimes that could be an issue in consulting. It could be an issue in the corporate. It's changing, but there is a difference, and we should acknowledge that.
Okay, excellent. Matthew?
Yeah, I'm going to layer on to a few things on that because I think it's really true. The first one is with the confidence. The confidence that came from consulting was, a classic example. Just last week we had to do, I think it was an ISO security form, which I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that, but it's just a nightmare to go through pages like this. When that comes up, someone's like, hey, you got to do the security for the company. You're like, okay. And you grind through it, 3 days, you pound it out and it's done. I wouldn't have been able to do that without consulting, where you know nothing about something, you just get in, you do that iterative process. That's, it sounds cliche, but that 80-20 is just a fantastic skill set. And it does come down to a bit of confidence in knowing you can sort through anything. So I think that was a huge thing. The other thing that's a little bit more intangible is, coming from consulting, it's really true. The caliber of folks you work with are just ridiculously good and inspiring, and not just from problem solving or whatever. You get a whole host of different folks, but the stuff they do is just unbelievable. And I think that really raises the bar for yourself. And you really start to think more holistically about what you want to do in life, your careers. It's really about the whole person. And I think, at least at McKinsey, they just do a phenomenal job of that. What was the second question?
The cultural change.
Cultural, yes. This is a good question. Because, one of the things, and I think you mentioned this earlier, you can work with anybody in the world when you're working at one of these global firms. You'll be on a phone call with somebody from India, you'll have a guy from Africa, throughout Europe, Poland, everything. And some of these studies, you have 2 weeks to get off the ground and drive. And you're able to connect and work together on day one within 5 minutes. You speak the same language, you develop your McKinsey way. When I first went into consulting, that was difficult because I thought of better ways or more creative ways, and it was difficult to adapt. But there's, that efficiency gain you get from that is actually remarkable. Now, when you go outside of consulting, I think the longer you stay, it gets more and more difficult. So that's something always to consider. I thought it would be a breeze because I'm pretty relaxed. I didn't think of myself as like a hard, rigid consultant. But yeah, the things like the speed things get done, the structured problem solving, it's amazing. But not all folks think in a structured way, and it can be frustrating at first. And you have to sort of learn different ways of thinking and communicating. So there's a bit of a ramp-up curve, but there's a lot of cool things with that. And sort of closing on that, when you do exit consulting, I think it does open a lot of doors. Definitely having big firms in that definitely will. But I was surprised on my journey when you sit down and talk. Even today, if I say, "Hey, I'm a former McKinsey alumni," a lot of people have a knee-jerk reaction that, "Oh, you're just a consultant," and they have a perception of that. So you really have to manage through that when you leave. You have to change your language. Sort of unlearn a lot of what you've learned, keeping the good stuff. At least that's when you're working a little bit outside of a consulting role. So that was something I wasn't aware of when I left, but was a surprise, but a pleasant one.
All right, and Wendy?
Well, I think, a lot of the main points have already been said by the other panelists. It's a very similar thing, regardless, I think, of where you're going when you're leaving consulting. One of the benefits I felt quite a bit when I was working with IMS. IMS would have strategic projects, but often they would even have smaller scale focused analyses, which is, I think, a little bit more different than BCG or McKinsey. So the piece that I kind of missed from the consulting side that I really enjoy now being on the client side is getting more of that full picture, being able to see really a lot of the ground up reasons for the needs, the questions, the projects that you're doing. Sometimes that couldn't be completely forthcomingly shared with an external partner while I was at IMS, and you couldn't always see the full impact of the work that you were doing, which I really enjoy being able to get a view to now as well. Just more of that full picture. But a lot of the work, I mean, especially because as I highlighted, like IMS is really focused in specialty consulting, and it's very, very similar to the work that I do for GSK today. So I mean, the skill sets were invaluable. It can day to day translate very, very clearly. But one of the maybe the things that are a little bit less appealing or something that needs to take a little bit of getting used to is as my colleagues have said, it is that change in the culture and let's say some of the peers and the potential hierarchy that can come with being in a corporate company versus on the consulting side that I think takes time to get used to. And I mean, coming from consulting too, it's get used to, but also try to influence as well. So that for me, I think are really kind of the biggest kind of pros and cons.
All right. So now that we have kind of covered sort of their overview of current role, their exit strategies, and how consulting and with their educational and background, well, consulting in general has helped them prepare, make those exit strategies to post consulting roles and the opportunities that they were exposed to. I open this up to the audience for any questions that you have. Yes. Okay, so then the question is, how did work-life balance kind of take an effect, and how they kind of view on it, and if that influenced their sort of plan to exit consulting? And each one of you can have some time to talk about that.
Sure. I think for me, work-life balance was the single biggest factor which was the reason I left consulting. And don't get me wrong, I think in consulting it is not bad always. It's just unpredictable in consulting, and that is something that at this stage of my life I felt that I need more control. It varies in consulting from project to project. All consulting companies and BCG as well is trying to do a lot to make it more flexible. But the fact of the matter is that we do very high priority projects. Clients pay us a lot in consulting, and hence there is a lot of pressure. And if you are doing a due diligence where a private equity company has to decide on whether to acquire a company or not, you have 14 days, and in those 14 days you have to make a call. So you don't have weekends then. So it is dependent on project to project. In general, I would say it is not very bad, but it is very, very unpredictable. In one case, you could be doing 100-hour weeks. In another case, you could be doing 60-hour weeks. So it is just widely different. And that is something that I thought I needed more stability and control on. And that is why I left consulting.
Okay, Matthew?
Yeah, so, probably very similar experience. The thing to add to that is with consulting, as you start off as a generalist and start to get more specialized, you always have to think about trade-offs and what you want to do. My interest was more in technology, so I'm on planes going out to Silicon Valley every week, which is not fun. It's cool the first few times, but it can be tough. But I've seen folks who have been able to manage it, and sometimes it means, hey, you're specialized in a certain area, so you have local clients. But if it's, you're passionate about one thing, let's say you're doing airline companies, you can only serve one client in Canada, you're going to be traveling around quite a lot. So it's all about trade-offs. It is manageable. I think the firms are doing, what they can. It's actually pretty impressive. I talked about paternity leave for 8 weeks. I think that's phenomenal. But when you're on the ground and you have deliverables, there is that high pressure environment. I've had experiences working, it was actually my first time managing with a younger associate who just came back from maternity leave. And, we sat, and the firm's trying to encourage this, is really to think and strategize about your team norms, like what's really important to you. It's literally on a daily, hourly level. Like, I need to get a coffee at this time. You almost have to be that self-aware to really manage through the work-life balance, because you're really being pushed hard on that. But if you have those open conversations which they're starting to really encourage, I think that's great. The uncertainty piece is absolutely true. Now I know McKinsey's doing a lot for, you can take, 2-3 weeks off, they have flex time, all these sorts of things, but it's a very high-low cycle. It's going to be tough to crack because by nature it's a servicing company and you're servicing clients, and they take priority. So it's a tough thing to crack. I think they've done a tremendous amount of work into it. It's evolving. They're listening, but being real about it, like work-life balance is tough in consulting.
All right, Wendy.
What I would add to that is, I have to say a lot of the reasons that I also left consulting did have to do with work-life balance. I'm a mom of 2 boys, and I actually was a mom even before I started consulting. So that's not to say you can't have a family and be a successful consultant. But it was getting to the point in my life where the unpredictability was making it challenging for me to really balance the way I wanted to balance. I think there are ways that it can still happen, but for me, in addition to my goals of eventually wanting to move the client side, they came together at this point in time. Having said that, though, I think flexibility is something consulting firms do try and add in. It's the flexibility in terms of where you work, when you work, whatever, but you still have to get the work done. There's a timeline, there's a deadline. You're as my colleagues have said, you're servicing someone else and you've made commitments and you need to live up to those commitments. And that includes when, unfortunately, unpredictable situations happen on your side as well. You still have to live up to those commitments. So IMS was actually, I think, maybe one of the firms that maybe had a bit of a better work-life balance, because our clients were pretty much either located here in Toronto or in Montreal. So there wasn't a ton of, long-term travel that was involved. Our clients were happy for us not necessarily to have to be on site on a regular basis, but still the demands that they had for the work that they were coming to us for support did have tight timelines on them. So you may have to work long nights. It may be in the comfort of your own home and in front of your computer, but still it could sometimes work out to be 100 hours. Hopefully there would be a balance, though, at some point with a bit of more of a lull of a 50, 60 hour too.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your insights. For how long did each of you work as consultants before you decided you wanted to transition to a different career that's more stable? I mean, not stable, more predictable.
So the question is how long how many years they had been in consulting before they kind of decided to exit consulting? And,
I was in consulting for 6 years.
Okay. And
I probably decided day one, but I was there for three years. No, in all truth, I remember going to, it was one of the first training sessions that they had. They fly you out, you learn all these great skills, you meet a whole bunch of people, and there's people right away. So what are you doing after McKinsey? Like, I was on day one, I'm like, seriously? We just started? But yeah, you sort of evaluate, you ebb and flow, and everybody's actually pretty open about it. Like, are you thinking of leaving? You don't. You know, sometimes things work out. There's periods where you're totally committed. You're like, this could be amazing. There's periods that you're not. So, but 3 years.
I was with IMS for 4.5 years. I probably kind of made the decision to really kind of start evaluating the next step. Like I said, maybe a day one, because I was open even with my minus day one, because I was open with my interviewers that was likely something I would be considering. But to actually practically think about the move, that was probably about the 4-year mark for me. Yeah.
That's a very good question. Follow-up.
At times happy, at times not so happy. It's a ebb and flow. Right? Sometimes you are very happy and you feel like, oh, this is it. I will become a partner in this firm and never leave. And at times it was like, okay, I need to quit now.
For me, they're probably some of the best experiences of my life were in consulting without question, where you sit there, you're in your chair and you're like, really, I got to do this. This is amazing. And it could be anything from doing operations, working in like aerospace, defense, all that stuff. There are those moments that are extreme highs. And then also with the people, like, I know everybody says this, I was always skeptical of it, but when you're with the team and you're working long hours and that, it's just amazing working with those folks, and that's very addicting. That's probably the hardest thing to leave when you're in consulting, and that there's an element of happiness there.
I can kind of really identify with that. I would say the team is you build such a bond with the people. You're not slogging it by yourself, if you will. Your people are in there with you, and they're supporting you, and they're right alongside you. But no, honestly, I would say I was happy. There was times where I was very happy. And overall, would I say, was it a great choice, and did it make me happy? Yes, I do believe so. It made me happy to bring me to where I am today. I think it was a tremendously valuable experience, not because it was just awful or anything, but it did have its moments that were a little more challenging than others. But the learning and the movement forward in terms of my personal development were absolutely worth the trade-offs that went with that.
Yeah, and I would like to add, clearly more happy than sad. Clearly, I think there's no question about it, and I think it has been one of the best decisions of my life to join consulting. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
All right, him and then Charles.
So my question is mostly for Mouneesh, because you come from an engineering background. So I'm curious to see what the transition was like from engineering to consulting and then eventually to banking. Because I'm also in engineering, and then I'm trying to see, if I'm like prepared to, for example, going from something right away or things like. How was that in transition?
So actually, consulting is one career where your background actually does not matter, and I really mean it, because it is what you do is actually question stuff, and not knowing is actually beneficial. And I don't know, hence I am allowed to ask questions. And sometimes, I mean, you would be surprised how many times this happens, that people who have been doing it for 20 years get it wrong. And I think it's the first principles thinking is what is required, and it doesn't matter what background you're from. So it is immaterial whether you have an arts background or engineering background. What you will end up doing is completely different. Moving out of consulting into Scotiabank, I think that was more determined by what I had been doing in consulting. And as I said in the very beginning, you have to take a call on what value will you bring to the table when you move out of consulting. Most of my work that I had done was in financial services, and I thought that's a natural point where I can go on and say that, okay, I have done work in credit cards, I had done work in commercial banking, so I will bring something to the table. If at that point of time I said that, okay, I want to do technology, and I want to go into IT company or Amazon or something like that, I think you can still make that move, but probably you'll not get value for the experience that you are bringing to the table. So that was more natural. I think engineering to consulting is very easy, even though it seems unnatural.
I'd say though, I agree with what you say, but there is a disproportionate amount of engineers with MBAs in consulting generally. But I think it comes from the structured thinking and all that, so maybe it comes more naturally. But I think over the last 15 years or so, they've really opened up the doors and really like that diverse background of people that don't know.
Charles?
Yeah, we have an online question here. The question is, would you go back to consulting? And I mean, based on your work-life balance answer, I don't know about that, but is there anything what would it take, if anything, to go back to consulting? Or to consider to go back?
Okay, so the question was if they would return to consulting And if so, in what way? It doesn't necessarily have to be. From my understanding, I do understand as you start as an associate or a consultant, you are, doing a lot more work than you would be doing once you have reached those, sort of higher levels as a partner, because you were more sort of managing teams at that point in time. So, again, from your perspectives, again, addressing to all three of you, how would you, if you had to go back, or would you first? And if you do, in what way?
So it's too early for me to say. I have just left consulting. It's not even 6 months. So not right now, for sure. Would I consider going back? Yes. I mean, I have a very good relationship. It's not as if the relationships are bad. I still get invited to basketball games when the team is going. So I love the team. So there's no doubt that I can go back if there is an opportunity which I feel is good. What could that opportunity be? I don't think right now it will be in a consulting sort of a role. Maybe there are models which at least BCG has where you go as an advisor and not get involved full time. So then you have more control that you select, okay, I'll only work 50 hours a week. If that is a model that is at some point available, maybe yes. Not going back as a project leader, principal, partner, not that track anymore.
Yeah, I think for myself, I think I've been pretty lucky with my job now. I'm sort of doing consulting, the elements of consulting that I actually like, and not the things that I don't like. So, a big thing for me is working across industries, and even now doing things in financial services, vertical farming, infrastructure, all those things, and working with clients, building capabilities. That's still there. So, that piece of it, I at least in my head, I'm still doing the consulting. Going back actually with a consulting firm, definitely not for me. And the simple reason is I like to have an ownership mindset. I like to have my own P&L. I like to do that and build things. I think you can do that in consulting. It's very different. You manage budgets rather than actually having it, at least for me. And, seeing your teams grow, seeing your company grow is just, it's awesome. You just feel like you're making more impact. So me, it's probably a no, but we definitely like, and are exploring working with consulting companies as well. So that relationship stays, and, it's not as clear as you're cut off and that's it. There's no more consulting. So there's elements that are still there.
For me, I would say the same thing. It's too early to say, but more likely than not, I don't think I would return to a similar structure to what I left in terms of the formal kind of consulting firm. A lot of people in pharma do, stints in pharma for an extensive period of time, and then kind of become independent consultants, if you will, and provide their expertise, almost like that advisory role Mouneesh was talking about, but and that might be something I would consider down the road, more for that flexibility. But right now I'm really liking what I do now, and I think it does kind of remove some of the things that I was looking to change from my consulting life. So I don't think I would see it going back, at least in the same way I left.
Do we have any more questions? Oh, we'll address the lady in the back. Yes, you. Yeah.
So I was wondering if you're going into consulting and you're really passionate about maybe like a very niche area, how do you kind of convey your willingness and eagerness to learn and try new things, but at the same time keeping in the back of your mind, and even maybe you convey to the firm that you're working for that you have an interest in this particular area. How do you kind of navigate that balance?
So again, it's about sort of your interests, but also making sure that you're politically correct to position yourself where you show your eagerness to learn, but at the same time also conveying the fact that you're interested in a particular niche. How do you convey that to your leaders? And again, open to all three of you.
Sure. So it's quite different in different parts of the world, at least for BCG. I think North America the staffing model is pretty much capitalistic. You can say no to projects if you don't like. Obviously, you cannot say no all the time and be on the bench, but you can sort of guide your way through what projects you want to do. At the same time, you have to be cognizant that this is a demand-driven business. So you cannot always orchestrate which project you want to be on, because you start projects based on your availability. So you finish a project at that time. If there are 5 projects starting, you have to choose between one of them, and the team also has to choose you. So it's sort of very, very demand and supply dependent. I have seen people who have made it happen, and I have seen people who have tried it and not always end up doing the kind of work that they want to do. And it varies from person to person. If you are in Southeast Asia, for example, you have no control. So you just get an email saying that you are staffed on this project. So it depends from which part of the world you are coming from. It is more under control here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really important question, both before you join consulting and then managing it while you're in consulting. It's probably for me, it was the most important. One thing I didn't think about, when you're working at particularly the big 3 firms, they have a certain clientele. They tend to be massive companies. And what that does, at least for Canada, it can limit you in terms of what you want to do. For instance, healthcare is very difficult to do if you're working at those top 3. You'd have to go down to the States. Or if you're interested in technology like I was, there's not a lot, well, there's starting to be a lot more in Toronto now, and in Canada, but all the big players are down in the States. So you really have to think about that. And I know some folks that actually declined offers at big companies to work for a smaller consulting firm because that was very important to them. And as it goes, it's all about trade-offs. Then when you're actually doing consulting, I think voicing your passion and pushing to it and driving towards that is the most important thing to do. You're going to get pushed back all the time saying, hey, it's supply and demand. For instance, Canada going through a recession, chances are you're probably not going to do a big strategy study, a growth strategy study. You're going to be doing a lot more cost cutting, right? That's just the way it is. But that said, if you really push and you make those opportunities happen and really take ownership over that, they'll get done. And I think that's something I wish I knew earlier, because it probably took me about 4 or 5 months of studies to really figure out that, hey, I can push back, and that's okay. So that's like good tip for sure for starting your consulting career.
I guess I probably have the most simplistic answer is that I did choose a firm that is very specialized. So I would be doing the things that I was most interested in. So that was my solution. So I didn't have to navigate a lot of the same things you get in a big generalist firm.
Charles, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah. It's more about curiosity. If you guys can describe sort of what the journey is like on the other branch. I mean, we talk about even in this conference, what's it like to be a consultant? Now, when you exit, what's it like? What about the other path? Like, what's it like to try to go for a partner? How different is it from being a consultant? I mean, in terms of what stuff we talk about, work-life balance, responsibilities. In general, I know it's like managing projects, but is it more,
Yeah, so it's a different path, obviously. I think at least how I think it happens is, as you become senior in a consulting firm, the responsibilities start increasing. So as an associate, you would be doing a small module. As a consultant, you would be doing bigger modules, more important modules. As a project leader, you handle a full project end to end, manage the client relationships. As you become principal, you start doing more than one project simultaneously. And as a partner, you have to manage the client relationship. So it is a natural progression, but the role keeps changing at every level. So from project leader to principal, you have to handle more than one project, which is for essentially adding complexity and little bit of coordination issues that you will have. Beyond that, you have to start selling. So to become a partner, you have to sell. So it is a very at every stage there is a pressure that is there on you to do certain things. So till project leader, it is execution. Beyond that, in BCG, it is you start execution plus selling. And as you become partner and senior partner, there are more expectations around managing an office and managing some practice areas and ensuring that The thought leadership is there, so publishing reports. So at every stage, there are different things that you are evaluated on and you are expected to do, and some people do that as well.
Yeah, I think from what I observed, don't mean it to be a cop-out, but it's just a totally different path for every person. I've seen folks there who, they made him partner, I think 3-4 years out of undergraduate, so a very short path, but, very clear on what they wanted to do. And they built some amazing service line doing that. And then you see other folks who take more of an expert role. So there's a lot of different paths, but I do agree, because of the up and out culture of that, your role does change as you go. And I know a person who was happy being an associate, got promoted to manager, had no interest whatsoever, and left the firm because of that. Because the role really does change. And as you're a partner, you're not doing the analysis anymore. You're not, in that day-to-day problem solving. As a partner, I'd say your job is to be as levered as possible so that you're making impact on all the projects, minimum amount of time with the most amount of impact, and that's all you're doing, which some people love. But because of that up or out culture, if you end up landing in a position you don't like, or there's a phase in that, if you're not into doing more administrative stuff as a manager, it might not be for you. So, yeah.
I would say, even in a specialized firm, it's the same situation in terms of like the roles that you're moving and the progression and the responsibilities. IMS is a publicly traded company, so they didn't have partners. The highest level would have been a principal. And I left pretty close to becoming that level at IMS. For me, at that point, it wasn't meeting. That's why I had said I had achieved my goals. I felt I had learned a lot practically about how to interact with pharma, how to carry out the projects that were most important for them from a strategic point of view. But the final stage was moving more to that final client relationship management role, which for me, I didn't see advancing the knowledge that I was hoping to get out of it. But there are the people who kind of stay there. It's a bit of a pyramid structure, and people do move out throughout if it doesn't suit them. But there are a number of people who are really interested in getting to that point, and that's where their interests lie, and become successful at it. And that's, I think, those are the people that kind of hit that apex of that pyramid, if you will.
Just wanted to add one thing to that I thought was amazing experience. I remember a colleague who was thinking about leaving, and they went to the partner, weren't sure what they should do in that. And the partner sat down, they did a whiteboard session, just talking about what are your priorities in that. And they just did an issue tree pretty much, trying to problem solve. Should they stay on and go for partner, or should they not? And it was just totally objective, fact-based, and it was amazing. And you actually have those experiences a lot. And so, it can be a little jarring for the first time somebody does that to your life, but it's pretty cool, and you have that support there. So it's not at all like this ridiculous pressure to stay. People do want you to be there, but if it's not for you, or if it's not part of your objectives, it's much more comprehensive in the help that they get and the trajectories that you go.
And just add again, they're always happy when you move to the client side because they have the champion over there.
I wanted to ask a personal question. So, we are kind of giving advice and kind of an insight to our grad students here, postdocs and alumni from the arts and sciences. So if you have any sorts of advices for these, students coming from these various backgrounds, what would it be? And the second part to that question was, looking back in your position from now, like, would you not have done consulting? And let's answer that first.
Okay, so let me answer the second question first. I think I said before, I think consulting was the best decision that I have taken in terms of my professional life. There's no question about it. I loved the work. I learned a lot. The way I got in and when I got out, I was a different person. So there's no question about that. In terms of the first question on what advice I would give, I think my biggest advice is linked to my experiences. I think I have had the opportunity of working in 4 countries, and it is something that not many companies can offer. So if you end up doing consulting, which I would recommend, you should think about exploring the global exposure that most of the large consulting companies can provide. It is an immense learning experience. It is there is no other way of learning which can be as fast and as enjoyable as this. Do explore the global aspect. Go around developing economy. Go around Africa. Go to Europe and do some projects there. Do a 1-year stint there, which is very encouraged and very easy to do if you are in consulting. So make use of that. Would be my recommendation.
Which 4 countries were these? Just out of curiosity.
India, South Africa, Sri Lanka, and
Canada. Okay. Matthew?
Yeah, in terms of advice, I think, one of the things I found, particularly exiting academia, is really changing your mindset. And like, it's amazing when you look back at where you were before to where you are now. It's very difficult to do. And it takes time, and don't be discouraged by that. So, that's one thing. So, and the second thing really is useful throughout your career, at least I found, is again, just talking to people, doing those awkward conversations. Pretty much like the most uncomfortable thing, you don't really want to do it. Force yourself to do it. You're going to grow so much out of that. So do those things. I think that's super helpful. And when there's a second
The consulting,
component.
would you go back?
Oh yeah, no,
Abby,
I'd absolutely. Consulting it's there's very few people where I'd say it's a bad decision to do. Like it was just absolutely amazing experience. It can be tough, I think, if you're more of a creative type. But overall, I think it's a no-brainer.
Wendy?
I guess for me, being someone who spent time in more of a specialized consulting firm, I would encourage you. One of the great appeals of consulting is the ability to work in so many different industries and get that experience and that exposure. And I do think that's very valuable if you're trying to kind of figure out where your niche is. But do try and spend a little bit of time. I would say even if you are unsure of where your path might lead, try and spend a little bit of time thinking about what is it that you do like, what is it that you think you would really like to try to expand your horizons, and just to get a bit of that sense of self-awareness. So you do think about the path that will work the most for you, and you can think a couple years out, ideally even 5 years out, but I know when I left grad school, 5 years out seemed very difficult to envision. So where do you think you'd like to be at least a couple years out, and kind of start to chart that path, so you know a little bit more about yourself, and you have the opportunity to leverage a little bit of that pathway in whatever kind of, whether it is consulting or it ends up being something that's not consulting. But in terms of whether I think I've already answered that too. I actually completely appreciate the experience I had in consulting. I do not regret it at all. I would definitely have done it over if everything I know today. And I do think it's a very valuable, very valuable way to gain great experience.
Yes?
Did anyone from all three firms, did anyone who came from more of an arts background, how did they do that?
Yeah, so yes, absolutely. A lot. I can think of about a half dozen people who, some are performers. I know actually a lot of performers. I know somebody who was from Cirque du Soleil. I know someone who did Broadway musicals. So almost everybody plays a musical instrument, jazz musicians, everything. So there definitely is a creative element. But what I was really actually getting at, looking back at my comment, was the creativity is in, you want to find a different solution, you want to find the best solution. So, very much in consulting, because of the time box nature of it, you have to just, put a marker in the sand and drive towards it. It's hypothesis driven, and there might be 8 different solutions. You just pick one pretty much on day one. It might be good enough, and you drive towards that. And that can be pretty challenging for some folks to do that. There's a good reason why you do that, not only because of the time box nature of it, but also to move organizations, huge organizations like banks and large enterprises. It's like a giant whale, and you have to just pick a direction and go. And that's more important than finding that perfect answer or finding a creative solution. So that's, I have seen folks who, especially with academia, you like to really drive to something new and creative, and it's a little bit more challenging in that environment.
Yes?
Thank you again for coming. Wendy already talked about it a little bit. How did you choose the firm you were actually in that with? How did you prepare for interviews or maybe for the job before you started?
So, I talked a little bit about how I chose. This was around thinking about what role I wanted to do. I saw myself in a strategy type of a role in a financial institution, which automatically limits the choice to 8 companies in Canada. So 5 banks and 3 life cos. Post that, I started evaluating which of these companies have a strategy team in place and which has consultants in place, ex-consultants, because I was very clear in my mind that I need to go to a team which has ex-consultants, because that is the only way they will value the expertise that I'm bringing to the table. So that shortlist became narrow.
Maybe I meant more like, how did you choose the consulting firm?
How did you choose BCG?
Oh, how did I choose BCG? Sorry for not getting the question.
That's okay.
I actually interviewed with both the firms, got both the offers, BCG and McKinsey, and at that time I thought the people that I was interacting with were more helpful, and I thought I could work with them, and just chose. There's no other rationale behind it. It was just, I felt that this is a team that I belong more closely with, and chose them essentially.
Yeah, for myself, very similar. I think a lot of it has to do with the interview process, how you feel, the type of people. There are cultural differences. It could be just local to that office, the people that happen to interview you. I think that's a big piece of it. And then also coming from U of T, GMCA, I guess many years back, I won't say how many, it was just starting out. So I think it was the second year. So it was a lot less people than even in this room. But that was a really great way to interact with people, talk with folks, really get a sense of the pulse of each of the different firms, and to make your selection that way.
As you highlighted, kind of already hit on kind of the way I kind of selected on my firm, but yeah, it was more, I had a better sense of the exact industry I wanted, and there are still other competitor firms that play in the same space as IMS. So I think that's where what my fellow panelists have talked about. It is about, during the interview process, you're meeting with them, speaking to people who are actually in the roles that you're thinking about getting, and getting a sense of who they are and what kind of makes them tick, and do you align to that? I think really kind of helped me even further narrow in on where I wanted to be.
So a follow-up for Wendy, because you're in a specialized firm, and McKinsey and BCG have, a very standardized way of sort of doing these case interviews. So was it any different in your firm, or if so, in what way?
So, I mean, I think all consulting firms, specialty or not, do the case-based interviewing. So from a general perspective, I think that there's a lot of the same elements. But IMS obviously was looking to target people who had that passion already for that particular niche. So there was a little bit more around that specific work and what the kind of interests and drivers were to be in such a specialized consulting function, to make sure that that work would be something that would satisfy any new candidates for a significant period of time into the future. So maybe I would say that's probably a bit of more of the difference, but I mean, there's still the behavioral interviews, there's the case interviews, there's the unofficial interviews, all the same kind of process, yeah.
So we can take 2 more questions. Yes?
Hi, thank you so much for your comments so far. I just wanted to ask, how has consulting helped you grow as a person? And secondly, how did your experiences help clarify your personal goals and vision?
So, complex question, extremely complex question. I think partly we touched upon this, everyone. I think I think I've got a lot of confidence out of consulting. So I think even if I start a project today, which I have no clue about, I'm pretty confident that I can get to the bottom of it. I can ask the right questions, and I think that is valuable. That is something that I think I've learned. And the second part is around thinking in a very structured manner. So if you have a big problem, okay, how do you break it down into 4 parts, 5 parts, and okay, solve each one at a time, which can help you solve any problem that you have in any business that you are handling. So I think these two aspects would be, I think, the most important aspects, I would say, in terms of development, personal development that I had. And your second question was, what was the second part? Sorry, I missed.
How your experiences in consulting helped clarify your personal goals.
I'm not sure that I am clear about my personal goals and visions, to be honest. I think over time, I realized that I need to spend more time with my family. And my wife was also doing consulting at some point of time. Then she was doing her MBA. Then she was traveling. So both of us were like moving around the world, not always at the same time. So when we were here together, we thought that, okay, this is something that we need to make work now. And consulting did not help it. It was not helping at all. So that's the reason why I left consulting. But it did give me the confidence that, okay, even if I move out of the role, I can still do fine in my life.
Yeah, I think for myself, actually a similar thing, the framing of the problem and that structured thinking, it really affects your decision making throughout your whole life and what you do. It sounds weird, but it's true. I think, you just have a more comprehensive view of different problems or ways of thinking about things, and you also drive to the real problem quicker. I find a lot, both in work and other things, you can really distill it sounds cliche again, but what's the problem you're actually trying to solve for, and you can think of that in more holistically rather than business problems with life and all that. So I think that's one value, and the second part again was more on was it experience? Can you clarify it again? Sorry.
Did your experiences then, if so, like how bring clarity to your personal vision and I guess like values?
Yeah. So it definitely injected a lot of values into you, and as well, McKinsey takes a lot of time. I'll call it personal care, mindfulness, those sorts of things, and retreats, and that toolkit, especially being in a stressful environment, you notice it. Like I was. Even after having a baby, you're sort of like monitoring yourself on energy levels, seeing what sort of things you can do, picking up on clues on families and friends, and that sort of level of empathy in stress environments. I actually think that was a pretty cool thing to have as part of your toolkit.
It's a lot of the same. I don't want to echo everything that's already been said, but yeah, I do strongly believe it's that confidence piece, that maturity piece, I would say, in realizing you can tackle what maybe when you're just coming out of a grad school seems like complex, daunting business questions that move mountains. You can do that. You have the ability, and you can make that work. And I think it's as part of that too, it's the understanding from a business perspective on what drives performance, all these pieces. What are the things that can make a business successful in the future, I guess for me personally, also it was to your question about your values and whatever. Consulting maybe specifically wasn't a project per se, but it did help me get clarity on that work-life balance that I wanted in my life. And I have to say, I do have a tendency towards maybe a bit of a workaholism type of a background, and I've had it all the way, including grad school. So it helped provide a bit more clarity on that and how I would like to balance that and how I'd like to move forward. Something I don't think would have been as apparent if I hadn't have done consulting.
And I'd like to give one example to what Matthew said, that you would be surprised to the extent the structured thinking, the process impacts your personal life. I have had fights with my wife, and in BCG there's a thing where you give the answer first. Everything that you write the answer first. And my wife will start a story and this is happening. I said, okay, tell me what is the final answer. And then I will decide whether I want to hear this or not. I've had fights with my wife because it just gets ingrained in you that you need the answer first. Don't tell me the story first.
All right. We're actually out of time, but we would really like to thank our panel speakers today for, providing insights. So a round of applause for them, please.